everyone, and welcome to Luminar Coffee Break. I'm Angela Andrieux, and today we're going to be talking about HDR, specifically single image HDR and maximizing the detail that you have in your highlights and shadows to make your image even more dynamic and awesome. I'm going to be showing you how to work from Lightroom today. So my personal workflow is typically from Lightroom. I use Aurora HDR and Luminar AI as plugins. And so I'm going to show you a little bit about my personal workflow today and how I go from Lightroom to Aurora HDR with a single image to bring out really great detail in those highlights and shadows, and then how I come back to Lightroom and send it over to Luminar AI for my creative stylizing. So let me go ahead and share my screen. You guys should be seeing Lightroom, up on my screen right now. And I have this really cool photo that I took early last year, just before the lockdowns happened here in California. It was actually the weekend before. I was up in Joshua Tree National Park with my photo club, and we were having a great time getting out in nature and taking some really fabulous photos. And what caught my eye in this scene was this beautiful old gnarled tree. Something about it, the way it had grown, the trunk was like twisted, and it just has so much cool detail, and I wanted to bring out that detail. And this is actually my after photo. Here's my before. This is my raw file, straight out of the camera, no other edits done. So what I'm going to do is right click on this image. I'm going to go down to export, and then up here too, you can see Aurora HDR. You have the option to edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments or open source files. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and open the source file and let Aurora HDR do my raw conversion. We'll see here in a moment when that pops up, and I'll walk you through the options. So here we go. We have our image here up in Aurora HDR. And I'm going to go here to these settings. Color denoise is already on. I'm going to leave that checked. And just for good measure, I'm going to turn on chromatic aberration reduction. Click out of that settings window and then create HDR. And so we'll let this load up. It should be pretty fast. When you're doing a single image, the response times are really pretty quick. If you're merging multiple images, that's where it can be a little bit slower. But I think we're almost there. Give it just another moment. Almost there. There we go. All right, so you can see here's our image with just the algorithm that Aurora HDR puts on it. It's called tone mapping, and let me show you the before. So there's our before image straight out of the camera, and just by virtue of opening it up in Aurora HDR, it brings out a lot of detail here in our highlights and even opens up some of these shadows down here, so it gives us a lot more detail to work with. You also have a lot of other tools here on the right that you can work with, but most of these in some form or another are also in Luminar AI, so I prefer to do all of that over in Luminar. So I'm going to go ahead and click Apply. This will take me back to Lightroom, and then I can open it up in Luminar AI. So we'll give that a second. There we go. It just popped up here into, let's see, I think, which one was it? I believe it was that one right there. So there's our edit from Aurora HDR. I just want to take a moment here, look at our comments, and say hello to Pat, Wolfgang, Simon, JGmail28. So glad you're all able to join us today. All right, so now we have our Aurora HDR picture back in Lightroom. I'm going to go ahead and right click on that, go down to export, and I'm going to go here to Luminar AI. We have the option again to edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments or open source files. I'm going to choose open source files because I didn't make any extra adjustments here in Lightroom. So I'll just go ahead and open that source file, and it'll open up the TIFF that was created by Aurora HDR. So we'll give that a moment to go ahead and open in Luminar AI. Come on. These things do take time when you're running them in as plugins. So, all right, here we go. I want to start by going over here to the scenery collection, and let's try Fast Fix. That's one of my favorites. Now, I feel like that makes this way too oversaturated. So let's try a few different options. Clear and sharp looks good. Ooh, pleasing touch is really nice. I like the tones that applied. I don't want to replace my sky in that one. I think I'm going to go ahead and run with pleasing touch. I think that is a really nice look for this particular image. Now let's go ahead and fine tune this by clicking on the Edit tab. We'll start with Composition AI and see what crop is suggested for us. Now, I like that this took away a little bit of the space here on the side and at the bottom. It's kind of boring, empty space anyway. It's not really doing anything to tell our story. I think that's a great crop suggestion, so I'll hit return on my keyboard to go ahead and commit that crop. All right, so let's take a look here first at our enhance. We can see that our Sky AI, or Sky Enhancer, has brought up. It's already brought up our Accent AI. I think those both look pretty good. I would probably like to add a little bit of structure. I would be careful though in adding too much structure when you've already run an image through Aurora HDR, because it can tend to come out really starting to look crunchy and unnatural. So unless you're going for a really gritty look, make sure you use a really low amount of structure, if at all. Let's see here. The web stylist says priceless program and always appreciate the edit tips. I'm so glad you're enjoying this. All right, so now to go ahead and style this a little further, I'm gonna go over to my creative tab and I'm gonna go down to dramatic. And dramatic suits this image really well because it ends up bringing out some of the detail, it desaturates a little bit, and just makes the whole image look really cool. We can also adjust the local contrast if you think it's a little bit too much or too little. I might back that off a little bit. And then we can also work with our brightness and saturation. You can see the brightness has come up a little bit with that preset. I'm gonna go ahead and pull that back a little bit. And the saturation level, if you think it desaturated too much, you can always pull that back up or pull it down further if you like. But I think that looks really good. So by adding dramatic, let me go ahead and turn that tool off and then back on. I think that's a really, really nice touch. Now there's a couple of other things that I'd like to do when I'm looking at this image. I notice that the rocks here in the foreground are a little bit bright. To me, they're distracting. And our subject is this tree up here. So I don't really want this foreground and what's leading up to the tree to distract us from the subject. Same goes for these rocks over here. I think they're maybe a little bit bright and competing with our subject. So I'm gonna do a little bit of local masking. I'll go over here to the local masking tab. I'm gonna start with basic. And I'm gonna pull the exposure down. And you can see right now it's affecting the entire image. I don't want to pull it down too much. I want this to look natural. So right about there, and then I'll go up to this where it says paint mask, and I'll actually choose a gradient, and I will pull that up from the bottom. So that way only those rocks in the foreground are being affected by that slight darkening. Now I can also go back up here and grab my paint mask, and just for good measure, I can paint in a little bit more of that darkness on this rock up here. I'm going to pull my opacity down a little bit on my brush, make my brush a bit bigger, and then just ever so gently paint in a little bit more darkening on those rocks up there. Now it really draws us into our subject more effectively. For a final touch, what I'm going to do is go over to my essentials and add a nice soft vignette. So I'll drag my amount slider all the way down to -100, and I'm going to drag my size down probably right about there. Now I'm going to click on choose subject and place this so my tree is right there in the middle of my vignette. I'll go to my advanced settings. I'm going to bring that feather up quite a bit because I like a nice smooth transition, and maybe even add a touch of inner light. I think that always adds a nice touch. And now we can go back to our amount slider and pull that back up and adjust it to where it looks really natural. And I think right about there looks really good. We've effectively darkened our edges, which draw us into the center of that vignette and really bring out our subject, which is that old, gnarled, twirled tree. So I'm going to go ahead and click on choose subject to turn that off. And let's take a look at our before and our after. It's a huge difference, and it adds so much depth and drama by taking that image from Lightroom into Aurora to bring out the depth and the shadows and highlights, and then to bring it over into Luminar AI for this stylistic treatment. It adds so much character to the image. So I'm going to go ahead once again and show you the before and the after. And now that I'm done, I can go ahead and click apply, and that's going to take me right back to Lightroom. And then I can take a look at all three of those versions side by side. Let's see here. Wolfgang asks, if at some point, please comment, couldn't speak Aurora and Luminar AI with each other without Lightroom acting as a go-between. So at this moment, you can't use Aurora HDR as a plugin with Luminar AI. There's a workaround. You can do it on Mac, but it doesn't work right now on Windows. However, you can use Luminar AI as a plugin to Aurora. So if you email me at angela@skylum.com, I will happily send you the instructions on how to do that. I've got them written up and can send them out to you. Again, my email is angela@skylum.com. Send me a note and I'll send you those instructions if you want to be able to use Luminar AI as an Aurora HDR plugin. And that'll get you kind of the back and forth without having to have Lightroom in the mix. So hopefully that'll be helpful to you. Hello, Joe. Glad you're able to join us today. All right, so we're back here in Lightroom, and let's go ahead and take a look. There's our edit that we created today. Here's my original that I created the other day. Actually, I like the one that I created today a little bit better The tones are a little bit warmer. I think it turned out really nice. So again, here was our original straight out of the camera. Here's what we were able to do with Aurora HDR. And then here's our stylized version from Luminar AI. I just love how this photo turned out, and there's so much drama and depth in it. I hope you guys enjoyed it too, and I hope you got some good tips on how to work between Lightroom, Aurora HDR, and Luminar AI. And like I said, email me at angela@skylum.com. If you only have Luminar AI and Aurora HDR, I can send you some special instructions. So with that, I want to wish you a wonderful afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you at the very next coffee break. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you're enjoying this. Bye-bye.